Today, we're going to do a brief lesson on immigration. Okay, there we go. So the slides for the lesson are here, and we're going to watch a short documentary from the New York Times. It's a little dated at this point, but it kind of gives us the perspective of kids that are kind of your age, that are the unaccompanied minors that are trying to come up from South America to get into the United States. So we'll kind of get to see it through the eyes of the undocumented minors. So again, just trying to practice that virtue of empathy, of trying to see um, the struggles with immigration, not just from the perspective of, say, our national interests, but also trying to understand, well, why is it that people are making these perilous journeys to try to get into the United States. And so there'll be a little video guide that will go with the video. So well, I'll open it up for now. We'll look at it in a second. And there's no homework, so that's nice. Okay. So here's our presentation. Okay. And so the chapter on solidarity is chapter 8. In this lesson, we'll cover pages 245 to 254 in your textbook. Your textbook didn't do a very good job on looking at discrimination in general or racism in particular. However, they did do a pretty okay job with immigration, so that was nice. Um, so um, as we pray today, kind of think in your mind, who are your immigrant ancestors? Unless you're an indigenous person or Native American, we're all of our ancestors came from somewhere else, right? And we often say that the United States is a nation of immigrants. So I thought I'd share two of my ancestors with you. This is Pietro Bielik, and see how his hair is curly. Like my hair is not curly as my mom's, but it's still not straight. That's where I get it from. He came from Poland around 1910. And when I looked up his Ellis Island records, it said like how much money he had. He had $25 in his pocket. And once he came to the United States, he met my grandmother. This is Barbara Dembski. And incidentally, that's her side of the family was my side. That the relatives who stayed in Poland and didn't come to the United States, like her uncle, when you go through Ellis Island, you have to leave the name of someone in your home country that they contact. And her uncle Joseph Dembski, he was one of the people who was exterminated in the concentration camp. So for my family, the United States really represents like freedom in our life. We wouldn't be alive if my Barbara hadn't come to U.S. And this is my Zeddy's store in McKeesport. He ended up, he learned English. These are his citizenship papers. I think he became a citizen in 1934. But this is his little store in McKeesport, and his uncle was a chemist, so they also had a pharmacy. So yeah, those are two of my immigrant ancestors. So as we're praying today, let's kind of think back to all the people from your own family who took the risk to come to the United States so we could have the beautiful lives we have. So let's begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Let's see. Let me put up the chat. Does anybody have any special intentions today? Yeah. Anybody else? For all of our grandparents and great grandparents, everyone who took the risk to come to the United States. Um, uh, oh, thank you, Alex, for your uncle. All right. And this is our prayers from Philippians 2, 1 through 4. If there's any encouragement in Christ, any solace in love, any participation in the Spirit, any compassion and mercy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, with the same love, united in heart, thinking one thing. Do nothing out of selfishness or out of vainglory. Rather, humbly regard others as more important than yourselves, each looking out not for his own interests, but also for every one of those, for everyone for those of others. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay. Whoops. There we go. So our learning objectives for today are, we'll define, oh, I don't know why I have the scripture part, but we will look at some of the way solidarity is defined in the tradition by the popes. We'll look at the church's teaching on immigration. We'll summarize the story of a teen seeking to immigrate to the United States from South America. And we'll reflect on how we can relate to the teen migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. And this is a quote that they included in your textbook from page 247, but Martin Luther King was such a great writer and such a great orator. And this is from his Christmas sermon in 1967. He wrote, "It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny." I love that. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. So again, that's King and his beautiful poetry, capturing the essence of solidarity. Again, the idea that we're kind of all in this together, whether directly or indirectly. And the popes, some of the things that they have said in trying to define solidarity and help us understand it is it's basically a universal call to love. So St. John Paul II articulated it as a call to friendship, not just to be a friend and a brother to those in our own country, but to everyone around the world. Pope Paul VI called us to build a civilization of love. And Pope Pius XI wrote about social charity. And by charity, he means not just like when we meet the immediate needs of people, but also just to have a sense of brotherly love. And that's kind of that universal call to love that the popes have throughout the centuries been calling us to. So when we think about solidarity in the beginning of the year, they often talk about like the 2 feet of justice or social justice. We have to have charity. So richer nations need to provide direct aid for poor nations, especially in times of natural disaster. And historically, the United States is a nation that's very generous. We provide a lot of humanitarian aid throughout the world. When you look at those lists, I should have gotten a link, but every year they'll publish lists comparing the generosity of nations, and the United States is always at the top of the list. But we also have to work for justice, and that's the difficult part. Justice demands that rich nations need to think critically about why poor nations are poor and correct usurious lending practices. So usury is when you loan money but at exorbitant interest rates, and it kind of ends up people getting kind of enslaved through these loans. So richer nations need to be aware of that. And we also have to again ask that question, why is it that poor nations are poorer, and what can we do to support them nations in the developing world, how can we support them in lifting themselves out of poverty? Because one of the big reasons why we have issues with immigration in the United States is because people cannot be successful in the countries they're in. So the more we could do to support those countries, the more likely it is that people will stay in their own countries and be able to live and make a life there. Okay, so what is specifically does the church teach? I summarized it with 3 main points here. First, we have the right to regulate immigration. Nations do have the right to place reasonable laws and limits on immigration. Obviously, that's we have to consider the interests of safety. You definitely don't want to have people just coming willy-nilly into the country, especially in an age of global terrorism that could put us at grave risk. We also have to know who's coming into the country, because if you have people who are criminals, we might not necessarily want to put our citizens at risk if you have, say, like drug cartels trying to come across the border and set up shop. But the laws have to be reasonable, right? Right now, you'll often hear in the media about our broken immigration system. And so we have to find ways as a country to have, some reasonable systems for immigration. That's another thing that when people express concern about illegal immigration, part of the reason why we have illegal immigration is because we have an immigration system that just doesn't work. If people could come here legally, they would come here legally, but we have this system that's and we'll look a little bit at that when we see the video, but yeah. But we do have the right to regulate immigration. That's reasonable. In terms of specifically Catholics, Catholics have a responsibility to provide for the basic needs of persons. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I didn't see the chat. Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. We have a responsibility to provide for the basic needs of persons regardless of their legal status. So the idea that we wouldn't provide for the needs of a group of people just because they're here illegally or because of their race or any other factor, solidarity calls us to love our brother no matter what. And Jesus teaches us, not to judge others. If someone needs help, we need to help them. Also the Old Testament constantly talks about welcoming the stranger, welcoming the immigrant. People do have the right to immigrate. They have the right to, if you're in this is part of the UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights. People have a right to seek better fortune in other countries if their own country is unable to support them. However, we need to do so legally without breaking the law. So, and that's one of the challenges that the United States is dealing with. And President Biden has put Vice President Kamala Harris, one of her main jobs as the Vice President, is she's supposed to be working with, in particular, Honduras, and trying to find ways the United States can support these governments in South America so that they could get their countries better organized so that fewer people would be fleeing Honduras to come to the United States. And that's been one of her jobs that President Biden tasked her with. Not so much with helping with the immediate aid of the people who are waiting at the border to see if they could get asylum. She's supposed to be looking at the bigger picture of asking the questions of why is it that the South American countries can't support their people, and what can the U.S. do to help those countries? All right. Any questions or comments? All right. So I just had some statistics here. This one shows you the chart in the map of the number of legal immigrants who came to the U.S. from different regions from 1820 through 2010. So obviously Europe is by far the highest. Then we have North and South America, Asia. This is another one from the Census Bureau that this one's kind of an odd one. They have Mexico, they have India, they have China, the Philippines, and El Salvador, and then they just have other countries. That was kind of interesting. I wish they would have given more detail on that, because in this you would have both countries like, say, Korea and Vietnam, but also countries in South America. I wish the chart was a little bit better. And then this is kind of a neat chart I found from, it comes from the Integration of Immigrants in American Society. And let me go to the website so you can see it better. Oh, hang on. There it is. So this is the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And it said 10 things you probably don't know about immigrants. And I thought this was interesting. 1 in 4 people living in the US today is an immigrant or has a parent who's an immigrant. In 2008, Asian arrivals began to outpace immigration from Latin America. So that's obviously sort of a dated statistic. I wonder how that is today. Immigrants have lower crime, arrest, and incarceration rates than the U.S. native-born population. Immigrants are generally healthier and less likely to die from heart disease and cancer, and have lower rates of obesity, depression, and alcohol abuse than U.S. native-born population. Approximately 14 million immigrants in the United States represent 13% of the U.S. population, a rate slightly lower than it was 100 years ago. And that rate is continuing to decline. And right now, the United States, when you look at you compare like us with like Canada or Germany, in Canada, like 20% of the citizens are not native born. And those numbers are increasing in other countries, whereas in the U.S. it is still declining. 28% of immigrants over 25 have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared with 30% of native-born citizens. 9% of students in K through 12 school system are in English language learner programs designed to help improve their English proficiency. And an estimated 26% of immigrants are undocumented or documented, a rate that has been declining since its peak in 2007. Today's immigrants are learning English at the same rate or faster than earlier waves of immigrants. And then finally, more immigrants live in the suburbs than in cities. I thought that was interesting. That kind of surprised me. So there's just some interesting immigration facts. Whoops. So, in the spirit of solidarity, oh wait, let me show you where the video guide is on Schoology. So, it's a really short little questions, but I have this LA Times documentary. It is a little bit dated, but it looks at the story of some young teenagers who are trying to go from Honduras to the United States. So after you watch it, or you can do this as you're watching it, in 2 to 3 sentences, describe the conditions in Honduras that motivate the teenagers to leave. In 2 to 3 sentences, describe the risks and challenges of the teenagers' journey to the U.S. Having watched the video, which CTS principle seems most relevant to the situation being experienced by the teenagers? In 2 to 3 sentences, describe how this principle applies to their experience. And then finally, put yourself in the shoes of the teens trying to escape to the United States. Does watching the documentary help you gain solidarity with immigrants trying to reach the U.S. seeking asylum from gang violence in their home countries? Why or why not? So those are our questions. And I think it'll say the date. Like I said, it is a little bit dated. Oh, we don't need to do the exit ticket, but hopefully it'll give you kind of perspective again, looking at it through the eyes of the children who are trying to come to the U.S. So we could kind of again practice empathy for them. Where did I put my notes?
Yo aquí empiezo mi viaje como inmigrante ya, empezar desde Guatemala. Y aquí pues ya voy para adelante ya.
We're riding in a decommissioned American school bus, quickly making our way out of San Pedro Sula, the Honduran city with one of the highest murder rates in the world. I'm sitting with Anthony, a 16-year-old migrant traveler, or who American immigration officials refer to as an unaccompanied minor. Our destination is the northern border with Guatemala, one step closer to Anthony's goal of eventually reaching the United States. Imagine being 16 years old, leaving home on your own, $8 in your pocket, and trying to make it all the way from Honduras to the United States. Close to 2,000 miles.
Nosotros los cuidamos más, aunque casi igual va, pero más de la migración.
You know, this is not the normal kind of thing for a kid to be doing.
Pues, ahí no sabría qué decirle porque la verdad pues ya ahorita ya me siento hasta más con valor porque la primera vez lo hice de 14 años.
Anthony is making his fourth attempt at getting to and then across the U.S. border, and he's far from alone. In 2014, more than 68,000 minors from Central America were caught trying to illegally enter the United States. As a result, the United States has put pressure on Mexico to stop the young migrants from arriving in the first place, apprehending the kids along the southern border with Guatemala and sending them back home. We left Anthony and traveled 350 miles up the road near the Mexican border to join up with Gustavo, Nelson, and Rodrigo, 3 teenagers who, like Anthony, are fleeing Honduras, but are attempting the journey to the U.S. for just the first time.
Con seguridad por aquí, ve. Y me entendés, salimos más adelante, pues. ¿Ah? Sí, para poder puente ya pasamos, vos allá no está pues atrás.
I don't even know, how do they know where they're going?
Por aquí, ve. O por donde veníamos.
Sí, porque por allá la calle, ¿ves? Por allá la calle, ¿ves?
Oh.
The crackdown on migrants by Mexican immigration has caused the price for a coyote, like this one who we followed as he took migrants across the river into Mexico from Guatemala, to almost double to around $8,000 per person for passage to the U.S. And so kids like Gustavo and his friends, with little money and even less experience, are forced to go it alone. The fare to cross the river on a raft is $1 per person, and after watching a stream of older migrants cross the river on foot, the boys decide they can save money and do the same.
Ya ve el tío, mira dónde le llega, hasta onda, mira.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Scary.
This border between Guatemala and Mexico is totally open. You can see just people freely going across on small rafts. We got chickens, we got produce coming across. This river crossing into Mexico would seem like a natural place for a border patrol crackdown, but it's not being implemented here. With the amount of goods, merchandise, livestock, and people crossing every day directly under the official border control checkpoint, it would just seem to be too lucrative for too many involved. Looks like they might finally have the courage to go.
No cambiamos precios, nada.
¿Verdad que era más fácil voltearse que venirse para acá? Sí, a la vez de que venimos aquí, viejos, porque tenemos valor. La ropa, calzoncillos y calcetines y el suéter, nada más.
Do you know the way? ¿Sabes el camino allá al norte?
Sí, ahí vamos preguntando, vamos llegando.
The Honduras so many of the kids we met on the migrant trail come from is one of the hardest places in the world to be a teenager. The official high school dropout rate approaches 50%, but everyone here says it's much higher, with kids routinely leaving school to help parents earning less than $2 per day. Homelessness and drug abuse are major problems. Young kids can be seen openly sniffing glue on city streets, with little interest to the heavily armed soldiers who patrol there. On top of that, much of the cocaine destined for the United States runs through these streets, creating a gang problem like no other. A lot of young people who make their way to the United States say that they leave Honduras because of the violence. Do you think that that's true?
Sí, hay familias que tal vez le matan a un hermano o algo y por temor se quieren ir para otro lado.
Carlos Posadas is a reporter for the Honduran independent news channel HCH in the capital, Tegucigalpa. On air, he has earned the nickname Hawk for the way in which he flies around the city and descends on crime scenes like a bird of prey. It's not uncommon for Hawk to cover 10 or 12 murders in a single day, taking pictures and video on his cell phone that he then presents uncensored live on the air.
Así es, buenas tardes, gracias compañeros. En Estudios Centrales de Hable Como Habla, televisión digital, información de último momento que se genera desde la colonia Flor 1, en el lugar menos indicado, cuando se dio esta balacera entre pandilleros y policías. También déjeme informarle que hace instantes en la colonia Altos de la Divagna, una persona de la tercera edad murió también en un enfrentamiento. Yo vuelvo a Estudios Centrales de Hable Como Habla, televisión digital.
One of the first scenes that we went to tonight, there was a dead body on the street and there were children walking by like nothing happened.
Sí, ahí era un barrio. Ya no se asombra tanto la gente. Muertes, maras, pandillas. No se asustan mucho ya. Como que se acostumbraron tal vez.
Mi nombre es Karen Joana Barahona, tengo 15 años. Aquí es la parte donde botan los camiones de basura, donde uno se va a reciclar.
And what are you doing here? Why are you here?
Estoy aquí por ayudarle a mi familia.
At the Tegucigalpa Municipal Dump, thousands of people, including children who have long since dropped out of school, compete with dogs and vultures to collect anything they might be able to resell. And for the privilege of working here, they will owe the street gangs a war tax.
Yo ni Alexander López, tengo 16, 15 años. Estamos reclamos materiales, ahí como botella, hierro, un montón de cosas, ahí nosotros los vendemos.
So you can make about 100 pesos, about $5 working out here every day.
Sí, 100 pesos.
And thinking about like your jobs you have to pay for your stuff. These poor kids.
¿No has visto a Franklin, hijo? A Franklin. No tengan miedo. Si es una cuestión de Casa Alianza, nada más.
In the middle of it all, we found outreach workers from Casa Alianza, the charity known as Covenant House in the U.S., offering kids treatment for lice and teaching them how to brush their teeth.
Háganlo. Háganlo. No les dé pena. Cepíllense así. Háganlo para arriba. Así, ¿ven? Háganlo. Para arriba, aquí, ¿ven?
Back downtown, the outreach workers look for kids who appear to be homeless or using drugs and try to convince them to come to the shelter. On the streets of Tegucigalpa, they're not hard to find.
Si vos me dices que ahorita te quieres ir, ahorita yo te llevo a Casa Alianza. Es una sustancia que ellos usan, les daña mucho el cerebro. Pero lastimosamente ellos en el resistol buscan como un apego. Para ellos el resistol es quitar el hambre. Entonces el resistol es como un amigo de ellos. Para olvidar las penas, olvidar los problemas.
The Casa Alianza shelter stays full to capacity, with kids brought in off the streets by their outreach teams. Jose Guadalupe is the director of the shelter.
En realidad es un conjunto de causas que suceden al mismo tiempo. La pobreza, los altos niveles de pobreza, la falta de oportunidades para estudiar, para el empleo, para la protección, la misma desintegración familiar, pero no podemos negar que actualmente es la violencia el mayor digamos, motivo o la mayor causa por los cuales muchos jóvenes y niños y niñas están decidiendo irse a Estados Unidos a pesar de los riesgos.
Ella me explotaba a mí sexualmente, laboral, porque ella me mandaba a traer y a dejar droga, venderla, ¿ok? Después acostarme con hombres.
18-year-old Melora Martinez is a resident at the shelter, along with a growing number of girls fleeing sexual abuse at the hands of gang members.
Bueno, yo tenía que hacerlo eso porque si no ya tenía las consecuencias.
Many of the kids we spoke to at Casa Alianza said they've either already attempted or will soon be trying to reach the United States. 17-year-old Zoila described what happened on her attempt before being caught by authorities and sent back to Honduras.
Unos morían de hambre, otros morían porque los mataban, porque no obedecían órdenes de personas que se encuentran en el camino. Y la verdad más que todo se ven muertes y como que raptan a las personas para prostituirlas y hacer cualquier cosa con ellos.
How many of you know someone who is in a gang, in a street gang? Total, almost everyone. Last year in San Pedro Sula, the gang problem got so out of control that the authorities simply shut down the high schools, a devastating development in a country already struggling to graduate less than half of its teenagers. The school in the Camilicón neighborhood is one of the few that managed to stay open, as a consequence of its principal being a former gang member himself, who was able to negotiate his school a neutral zone. How many of you have seen violence in your community? You know, when I came to your classroom and I asked everyone if they knew anyone in gangs, everyone raised their hands. But when I asked them about the violence, no one wanted to say anything. Why?
Mira, a mí no me gustaría contar eso porque es que...
¿Por qué?
Simplemente no quiero hablar de eso ni recordar malos momentos.
Is it because it hurts you to remember it or because you're afraid?
Sí, no me gusta acordarme y tengo temor un poco.
Estas creo que son cosas que uno como joven debe reservárselas, quizás no por temor, sino porque seguridad.
Te ofrecemos un desayuno a las 8:30 de la mañana y una comida a las 5:30 de la tarde. Por eso ya recabamos firmas ahorita para que al rato ya les den de comer. ¿Traes documento? ¿Nada? ¿Ni un documento, acta de nacimiento? Motivo de salida de Honduras, ¿por qué razón?
No hay trabajo, mucha corrupción, muchas bandas criminales.
Violencia.
Sí, mucha violencia.
¿Tu destino hacia dónde te diriges? ¿Tu idea?
Estados Unidos.
A Estados Unidos,
Sí.
Si Dios quiere.
Si Dios lo permite.
Ok. ¿Tus estudios?
La primaria.
La primaria.
Sí.
Primero, segundo, tercero.
Hasta sexto.
Sexto de
Sí.
primaria.
Sexto.
¿Cuántos años cumplidos?
19.
The migrant shelters in Mexico are full of young kids fleeing Central America for the United States. They all insist that they are 19 years old, and they never carry IDs. A precaution they hope, if captured, will keep Mexican immigration from deporting them back to child services in their home country.
Desde el momento en el que uno decide venirse, tiene decidido a correr cualquier clase de riesgo, incluso quedar, morir en el camino o algo así.
¿Cómo se llama?
Brian.
Brian, are you traveling alone? Are you here by yourself?
Sí, viaje solo.
Sí. Where's the rest of your family?
No les avisé porque los iba a poner en riesgo a ellos también si les avisaba.
Why were the gang members after you?
Para que les sirva a ellos porque quieren hacer guerra con la nacionalidad de El Salvador, con la policía, todo eso. Y para eso están reclutando mucha gente joven están preparando para la guerra, levantándose en armas.
The shelters are a neutral zone for migrants of all ages, free from the immigration officials who chase them down, and safe from the coyotes and gang members, like those pictured on a bulletin board near the entrance, who prey on them. The shelters are a place where the migrants can get a meal and a decent night's sleep before heading further north.
Van a andar en el monte, van a andar expuestos, en las ciudades van a andar expuestos. A nosotros se nos nota que no somos de aquí, se nos nota desde lejos, primero porque cómo vestimos, segundo los cortes de pelo, tercero las miradas, se nos nota desde lejos, porque no solamente estamos hablando de la migra, estamos hablando de otras autoridades que sí pueden tirarte, ¡pum! Pero como sos un inmigrante, y el inmigrante siempre, quiérase o no, aunque no lo seas, es malo, para cualquiera.
In reality, the chance that these kids will make it all the way to the U.S. is probably slimmer than it's ever been before. In the last year, Mexico has dramatically increased immigration checkpoints in the southern part of the country. Our own car was stopped and searched dozens of times, our passports checked thoroughly. Night and day, you can see the migrants being apprehended along the highways.
¿Cuántos kilómetros hay de aquí al DF?
Vámonos caminando hasta el DF. Que los tardemos un mes, pero con tal lleguemos. Allá están los migrantes. Allá creo. Fíjate bien. Así no creo que los hayan visto, brother.
Mira, mira.
Fíjate bien.
Para el monte. Mira, ahí van, de hecho. Ya los vieron.
Until very recently, migrants wouldn't have worried much about Border Patrol until they were reaching the United States. And rather than walking along the highway and dodging endless numbers of immigration checkpoints, they would most likely have hopped a freight train heading north from the town of Arriaga. But frequent raids like this one by Mexican immigration officials has made that option increasingly difficult.
El proceso comienza aquí. Los autobuses se parquean en este lado del portón y pasan al otro lado del comedor por acá y toman sus alimentos.
Once the minors are caught, they are deported back to child services in their home country. At this government-run shelter in San Pedro Sula, one after another the buses pull in from the southern state of Chiapas in Mexico, carrying hundreds of young Hondurans, all caught and deported by authorities as they were trying to move through the country on their way to the United States.
Y generalmente por el lado cerca de Acayucan, tengo entendido que está cerca de la frontera, o sea que no es mucho lo que logran transitar. Y la verdad que es que tenemos bastante afluencia de personas que están repitiendo el viaje.
The kids, as young as 13, and most of whom were traveling alone or with a small group of friends, are fingerprinted by child services, offered medicine and food if they want it, and released to a parent or relative.
The Mexican police, they caught you?
La policía de Migración de México me agarró.
Sí, la Migración de México.
Why do you want him to go to the United States?
Porque el motivo que nosotros fuimos de aquí es porque aquí están reclutando los menores, los mareros.
So you're afraid that he might join a gang. Is it worth the risk and all the danger that it takes to get to the United States?
Por todo el peligro del viaje.
Sí. Creo que no vale la pena por el riesgo, pero en veces hay que hacerlo.
Yeah. I really don't. We're on our way to visit this family that's in hiding here, 3 teenagers. But it's a really sketchy neighborhood. They asked us to take our windows down so that the gang can see us, to know that at least we don't have guns. Hola. ¿Cuántos años tienes?
16, 15.
You came off the bus from Mexico?
Sí.
Were you trying to go to the United States? Is that what you were trying to do?
Sí, porque con mi mami tuvo un problema, la habían secuestrado y ahí las vendían, los mareros y todo, entonces mi mami los de la DIC los fueron a rescatar, pues la fueron a sacar donde la tenían encerrada y entonces por eso fue, y a nosotros supuestamente nos iban a dar protección los de la DIC, pero no los dieron nada, pues. No los dieron nada y lo que hicieron supuestamente nos iban a ayudar para pasar allá, para los Estados Unidos. Nos iban a ayudar, pero estando allá no nos ayudaron nada.
You know, there's a lot of kids like you in the United States who made it all the way to the United States. Many of them are telling stories like yours. They say they're afraid to come back here because it's dangerous, that they could be killed by the gangs. Some people in the United States don't believe them. What do you say about that?
Nadie se iría así de puro gusto para allá. A gastar más bien lo único que teníamos de dinero, más bien que lo gastamos para la ida y todo.
Are you hiding from the gang now? Are you worried about your lives?
Sí.
And what will happen if they find you?
Que nos maten.
Back in Mexico, as Gustavo and his friends prepare to leave the safety of the migrant shelter, they say a prayer for safe passage through Mexico and a new life in the United States.
Primero tal vez habían 2 garitas de migración, ahora hay un montón. Entonces reforzaron más tal vez por muchos inmigrantes que va allá y no los quieren y nosotros hacemos la lucha tal vez por el futuro de nuestra familia. Entonces por eso emigramos.
that gives us a little insight into why we have the unaccompanied minors fleeing their homes to come up to the United States. So we could probably go through this together. Let me make a copy of this. We can take a look at this together. So, let's see. What were the conditions causing the the people to flee Honduras? So what were some of the things they're fleeing? Yeah, violence from the gangs and the sex trafficking. That seems to be one of the main things. Is you've got these gangs that are just running amok, and they recruit the kids to fight for them, and you know, the girls get taken into the sex trade. The boys are forced to fight. There's a lack of education because of the gang violence, so the kids aren't able to get an education so they can be self-sufficient in Honduras. There's also a lot. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, poverty and a lack of work for the young people. And so I think when you look at the situation these kids are in, we can kind of understand, you know, if I was in that situation, I don't know what I would do. I think, you know, I might do the same thing despite the danger. I'm older now, so when I look at a 16-year-old, I think, oh, it's just he's just a boy to me, and he's like traveling just by himself with nothing but a tiny backpack to try to, you know, get to the United States. And as I was saying, a lot of women have been trying to get into the U.S. and the people who are coming from Honduras, they're asylum seekers, so they're seeking asylum in the United States, which is a different category from, for example, immigrants who want to come into the U.S. just to work. And one of the problems that we have in our immigration system that we could fix that has caused the current problems is every year there's about 260,000 Mexican citizens who come in the United States legally. They go through the line. There is a line. If you want to come work here, you can get in. They work and then they go back home. Obviously in the agricultural industry, but we don't have anything like that for the South American countries. So you have these two different categories. You have people who just want to come here and work, and then you have the asylum seekers that are seeking freedom from the violence. And because we don't have a legal channel for them to go through like we do for Mexican citizens, they're coming up and they're all trying to get in either illegally or through the asylum system. So one of the things that we've identified that we could fix is trying to put in a system like we have for Mexican citizens so that we can more easily identify who wants to come to work, who's actually needs to come here seeking asylum. And that way give people legal channels to go through rather than, you know, if there's no legal way, people, if you're fleeing violence, you're gonna, you know, they're gonna come illegally, and that's not safe for us. It's not safe for them. But that's one of the things that could be done specifically to help the situation with the people coming up from South America. Let's see, what else do we have here? In 2 to 3 sentences, describe the risks and the challenges. So some of the risks and challenges are, I'll just list them. My tummy's rumbling. Okay, so what are some of the risks and challenges? Yeah. Yeah. That one, you know, dying on the journey, that's like, to hear those young people say, I'm going to risk my life because there's, your options are that bad. What else? Yeah. I would especially, they mostly profiled the boys in this episode, but a lot of women are trying, the gangs take the women and then put them into the sex trade. And they've noticed the increase of women and girls trying to get to the United States. And fear of rape used to be considered something that would make you an asylum seeker. But one of the things the Trump administration did to try to decrease the amount of people seeking entry was they took that off the list, which that's really sad because, I mean, obviously if someone's going to force you into the sex trade, you got to run away to save your life. Yeah.
What some people would do when, like, if like the family was like a little bit more wealthy, but they still like wanted their kids to like seek asylum in the United States, they would like pay someone to like take their kid on the do like the travel how everything works. But now that doesn't even work because like they find out that like a lot of the women were still like being raped on those trips.
I bet.
Or they would like be with the person with the maybe like transferring like switching people.
Yeah.
And then like so there really is no way like do the trip thing.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine being a young female trying to do that. They encounter dangerous people. There's just the environmental hazard. Like crossing a river that would be dangerous. There's the gangs. Some of the kids were worried about the gangs catching them. Whoops. What did I do there? The gangs catching them and retaliating. I don't know how to spell that. Maybe it'll tell me. Retaliating. And then there's just that you get caught, sent back, and you've wasted all your money trying to get to the United States, but you get caught in Guatemala, you get sent back home, and now you're in even a worse position because now you have lost some of your money trying to travel. Having watched the video, which CTS principle seems most relevant to the situation being experienced by these teenagers? Describe how the principle applies to their experience. So there's lots that apply. Anybody have an example? Yeah.
Like care for the poor and vulnerable, especially for teenagers and women because that's like a super vulnerable population regardless of like what situation you're in, and then on top of that to like be put put in dangerous situation alone makes it a lot harder because it's like really easy for kids to be taken advantage of because they just trust adults naturally.
Yeah.
And they don't really have the resources or like the skills to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's that. It can imagine growing up in a world like that I bet a lot of those kids get so hardened because so many adults around them are hurting them that they probably get really hard and can't trust anybody. That would be sad. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like scary how these kids try to escape being recruiters and gangs and try to escape prostitution, but along the journey they risk getting into that no matter what.
Yeah.
Because if they get caught, like they were saying, like they were in Mexico, like if they get caught by a Mexican gang, they can still
Yeah.
get put into prostitution there. So it's like
Yeah.
they still never really escape that
Yeah.
until they, I guess, until they get into the United States. But you know, the United States still has sex trafficking.
Yeah.
But not as
Yeah. Yeah, that's so sad. Wow. Other other CTS principles. One that someone mentioned in the last class was kind of the base principle is the life and dignity of the human person. So that's kind of the basis of all social teaching, but it reminds us that all human life has equal value. And one of the challenges for the United States in terms of deciding upon policy, the US government obviously has a responsibility to her citizens first. But at the same time, we're also called to a higher calling of, being responsible for our citizens, but also not neglecting our place in the global community, especially as a nation that's very wealthy, as a nation that other nations look to for leadership. That's one of the difficult balances in trying to decide, as in a democratic society, you guys are going to be voting, and it's going to be up to you guys to be the leaders and shape policy. How do we shape policy that both respects the U.S. interests, but also respects the dignity of all people, even people who aren't citizens of our own nation? Another one, so that would also include like rights and responsibilities. That's kind of what I just talked about. So we got to balance our responsibilities to our citizens with our responsibilities. What did I do there? Let's see. To the global community. What time is it? Oh, we got a few more minutes, I think. There's one other I was thinking about. Rights and responsibilities, care for the poor and vulnerable. Dang it, there was something else I wanted to add, and I can't remember what it was. I don't remember what it was. Anybody else? Any other comments for that one? Maybe I'll think of it. And then put yourself in the shoes of the teens trying to escape to the United States. Oh, I now I remember what it was. Subsidiarity. That's not one of the themes, but it is a big principle. When we think about how does the principle of subsidiarity apply in this case, one of the things we can ask is how can we support the governments in South America and help them create a better life for their citizens. So the people who are making this perilous journey they're not going to risk their lives unless they feel they have no other options. So, and like I was saying, this is supposed to be one of the jobs Kamala Harris is going to do. How can the U.S. support these governments, not just financially, but think about all the other resources we have? Could we send find our best police forces in the United States and help them train people in South America? Look at how has the U.S. been successful in fighting addiction? Can we help people in South America? Maybe just through education. It will take money as well, but trying to support the South American countries so that people won't want to leave, that they have jobs, they have opportunities. And as you saw, part of the way that's happening is through aid organizations like Covenant House. CRS also works in Honduras. I don't know if they were on our profile for this year, but both through our government channels, but also through private aid and volunteer work, ways that we can shore up these countries so that we don't have people making these perilous journeys. Right. All right, and then the last part's just kind of subjective. Put yourself in their shoes. How does it help you gain some solidarity with the immigrants who are trying to seek asylum in the U.S.? So it's almost time to go. So make sure you turn this in. And there's no homework. Next week, we'll look at race specifically in the Catholic Church and do a little bit of history. And then we'll have a final assignment. And that'll be our last week of instruction. And all the rest of the time this year will just be spent working on the social justice newsletters. So any questions or other comments? We're running out of time, but at least we have one day to spend on kind of looking at immigration. And again, with an eye to empathy and solidarity. All right, my friends, I will see you next time. Have a good weekend. And you guys too, have a good weekend.